As of July 1st, 2024, State of Indiana law requires this buyer agency contract to be negotiated and signed before I can show you any homes, and really before I can even offer you much advice on buying a home or a property you might be interested in. This is a change from the way things have been done for a long time, so you may have friends or family members tell you they've never had to sign a contract with their agent when buying a home. They aren't lying, they probably didn't. But now it is law. All dates, times, commission numbers mentioned are examples. This video is to be viewed only by prospective clients of Deb Tomorrow Real Estate and represent only the business practices of Deb Tomorrow Real Estate. Broker's commission for services rendered in respect to any broker is not set by law, is solely a matter of negotiation between the broker and the buyer, and is not fixed, controlled, suggested, recommended, or maintained by the Indiana Association of Realtors, the local board association of Realtors, the listing service, or any person not a party to the contract. The purpose of this contract is to define how the buyer and the agent will work together. It sets expectations, including how the agent will be compensated for their work. This contract protects both the buyer and the agent. Think about it. When you get your carpets cleaned or hire a plumber, there's an agreement or a contract that is signed ahead of time. When you have work done on your car, when you buy a new couch, when you order a new pair of eyeglasses, there's an agreement or a contract, and this is really no different. Even if you only want to see one house, this contract is required by law. Please keep watching so that you can understand how to craft a buyer agency contract that meets your needs. The contract I use is the standard contract developed by the attorneys for the Indiana Association of Realtors. This first section outlines the start date, the parties involved, and the end date of the contract. The contract time period can be any length of time that makes sense. If you only contact me to see one specific house that is on the market right now, our contract might be a week or a month. If you are more generally looking for a new home, it might make sense to make the contract for a longer period of time. I just want to point out here that the contract states on line 5 and 6, the buyer appoints the broker company as the buyer's exclusive agent for the purpose of assisting the buyer to locate real property for purchase or lease and to negotiate terms and conditions acceptable to the buyer for purchase or lease of real property. That means I'm working for you. Section A says the buyer agrees and acknowledges that you have no current buyer agency agreement with any other real estate broker. You can only be under contract with one realtor at a time. So don't go running around town signing all these broker agency agreements because that would become a mess. But this is why it's vitally important that you take the time to find the right realtor first. Section B states that the broker agrees to diligently attempt to locate property acceptable to the buyer, to negotiate price, terms, and conditions acceptable to the buyer, and act in the buyer's best interest. And then in Section C, we go into a more specific description of what you're looking for. Now, this can be vague, like a primary residence somewhere around Monroe County, or an investment property that's priced at less than $500,000, or it can be specific to one address, like 123 Main Street. This section of the contract really pertains to how the realtor will be compensated for their work. So let me jump in here and explain a little bit more. This is another aspect of real estate purchasing that has changed. Pursuant to a federal court order, it will no longer be customary for sellers to automatically offer to pay the buyer's agent compensation. For the past several decades, this has been the practice. While your realtor works for you, the compensation was typically set by the seller and paid by the seller, a method developed to help home buyers need less cash at closing. But as of August 17th, 2024, this is no longer the practice. Again, remember this when a friend or family member say, "I never paid my realtor when I bought a house." The process has changed. But don't panic, keep listening to understand your options. The first section regarding broker compensation pertains to a retainer fee, much like if you were hiring an attorney. A retainer fee is when you pay a fee up front, and if the sale closes, that retainer fee is deducted from the final agreed upon compensation amount. If the sale doesn't close, then the realtor would keep the retainer fee. I don't foresee this being used a lot. The next option for compensation is commission. In consideration for services performed by the broker, the buyer agrees to pay a certain commission amount, whether that's a flat fee or a percentage. There are a couple of ways that this can be paid. There are primarily two methods for how a buyer's agent compensation can be paid. Option 1, the buyer agent compensation is included in the buyer's closing costs at closing. The buyer pays at closing with other loan closing costs and down payment. So nothing is paid up front, but the buyer is responsible for paying the compensation at closing. Option 2, when making an offer on a home, the buyer agent compensation can be negotiated to be paid by the seller. This is similar to how it's been done in the past when the buyer agent compensation comes off of the seller's bottom line so that you have to bring less cash to closing. Remember though, since this impacts the seller's bottom line, it does impact your negotiation strategy. Other things to know about this section. It's for you or anyone acting on your behalf. There is a provision that if the buyer sees a house during the term of the contract and then uses another realtor to purchase that house after the end date of the contract, the buyer may still be obligated to compensate the realtor who initially showed the house. This is why it is, again, important to be diligent about selecting your realtor first. You definitely don't want to have to pay 2 commissions. And if the buyer has an accepted offer on a house and then walks away without cause, not because of an inspection issue or because of financing, but just walks away, the buyer could still be obligated to pay the buyer agent compensation. The next section, lines 53 through 61, basically state that commission is due at closing. And the second paragraph I read at the beginning of this video, and I'm going to read again. Broker's commission for services rendered in respect to any broker is not set by law, is solely a matter of negotiation between the broker and the buyer, and is not fixed, controlled, suggested, recommended, or maintained by the Indiana Association of Realtors, the local board or association of realtors, the listing service, or any person not a party to the contract. Section E is agency disclosures. You're actually going to get this information twice when you sign the contract because we also have an office policy form that pretty much states the exact same thing. But it acknowledges receipt of that office policy and it explains agency, which is a fancy way of saying I work for you, I represent your interests, and that I owe you the duties of trust, loyalty, confidentiality, accounting, and disclosure. This section outlines things like presenting offers immediately, telling you if I know of something that would adversely affect the property or the property value, advising you when to seek expert advice on matters like mold or radon or zoning, and complying with all state laws like this contract and all federal laws like fair housing. The second part of this section explains limited agency. This is when one realtor represents both the buyer and the seller. In that case, there would be things I might know about either party that I cannot disclose to the other. I cannot share any information that would create a contractual advantage for one party over the other. For example, I can't advise the buyer how much to offer, but I can pull comps based on parameters that the buyer gives me. If you do not want to enter into limited agency, now is the time to tell me. The next few sections are the legal and fine print stuff. F, you understand that I do work with other buyers and they may also want to look at the same homes you do. G, be aware that when we are touring homes, sellers may have security cameras and I may shush you. We discuss negotiations outside, far away from ring doorbells. And H, I will adhere to the Fair Housing Act, and because of this, I cannot present any personal information or letters to a seller. I will not discriminate based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity. The legal and fine print stuff continue with more disclaimers about confidentiality of an offer by sellers, advice to seek professional counsel when appropriate, the standard legal disclaimer about attorney fees if this contract has to be enforced in a court of law, and a reminder, the first of many throughout this process, about how to avoid wire fraud. Next come further conditions, which is where we can add anything about additional services or any notes specific to your situation. After you've read through everything, the acknowledgement section states that you have read the contract before signing it and asked any questions you have so that you understand it. That you do or don't agree to limited agency, we'll check the box there. Remember, limited agency means if you want to look at a house I have listed, do you want a different realtor to represent you or do you want me to represent both you and the seller? that we can change this contract at any time if mutually agreed upon, but the changes must be in writing, and that I have a valid Indiana real estate license. And this is the signature section. E-signatures are acceptable and easy, so it shouldn't be too much trouble to execute this contract. Remember, it is now legally required before looking at any homes. So please make note of any questions you have about this document, and let's be sure to discuss them.